Ready? It says we're live. How exciting. Hi. Hi, Sandy.
Hey Diana, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to be here for our second LinkedIn Live. Hello, everyone out there. I am Diana Lowe, the CEO of Blue Light Leadership.
And I'm Sandy Benz of Blue Light Leadership. Sorry.
I know it feels like so much pressure, right? When you go live, you're like, get it right. You're fine.
So,
Yeah,
so
take it away, Sandy. Take it
okay.
away.
So Diana, I just have to tell you, I'm so excited to bring to you our second of 6 LinkedIn Live sessions. This week, we're going to be focusing on the topic of understanding others to master your conversations. Now, some people might think that we're asking you to think about mastering what you say to others, but this is really about how do I have more effective two-way conversations.
I love
So,
that you said that and made that clarification because I wondered if people were going to be like, oh, you're going to give us a conversation structure. And I was like, this is not what that is going to be. So I love that you said that. Yeah.
exactly. And I think the key here is two-way conversations because many times people either feel shut down or they want to speak up or they don't know how. And so the two-way part of this is so important for leaders. And so speaking of leaders, what kind of leaders or what kind of people do you feel like this information and this little LinkedIn Live today is going to be best for?
I love that question. So for me, when I was thinking about doing this, and then Sandy and I started talking about this, we think about this like who's going to benefit from watching this. So we know that results driven leaders who you might get results. Maybe you work with people who get results, but somehow they tend to leave the people behind, or maybe they have a little bit of a high turnover, or it sometimes turns into like a morale problem. So that's who number one who I see it's for. Another person I really see this as for is like for the mid-level to senior level managers where your role now is really about creating great relationships and getting things done through your relationships as opposed to you doing it yourself. And then thirdly, it's really about who leaders, and you might find this, we talk about this a lot, Sandy, leaders who they have, like, as they progress in their career, their conversations are getting harder and harder because they're having to have more conflict or difficult conversations. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
I think that's really great, Diana, because when you talk about difficult conversations, that's what sometimes keeps people, the conflict keeps people tuned out. They don't want to get engaged. They don't want to be involved. And so without that involvement and engagement, we end up having ineffective teams and meetings and experiences at work. And then people tend to kind of start thinking about leaving. So we want to prevent all that from happening. But to do that, let's talk about what exactly is an ineffective conversation. So, Diana, what would you describe as an ineffective conversation?
And so this really comes from the definition of, the people that we work with, the people that I work with. Ineffective conversations from their mouth is really a conversation where it feels like it falls on deaf ears,
Mhm.
meaning that they're saying something and the message is being lost in translation. It's not being received. Sometimes we tend to hear it, at least I tend to hear it more like, oh, millennials don't want to work or Gen Z don't want to work because I'm telling them what to do and they're not doing it, right? So somehow there's a gap in our speaking communication, maybe even our typing communication, and it's not getting done. I think that's the first thing. The second thing I think is that ineffective conversation is a me-centered conversation. Now, I caveat this because as we were talking about this, Sandy, we often insert, and this is a Western world thing that I have observed, and I'm sure Sandy will talk about it a little bit more, but we often insert ourselves into the conversation when we don't always need to. So
Yeah.
this me-centered conversation is about me being right, me having the final say, me dominating the talking time. So really that's a very ineffective conversation. And that's really what we're talking about today.
It's funny, Diana, when you mentioned about how people insert themselves into a conversation, it got me thinking about a Saturday Night Live skit where there's a woman who I forgot her name, but she is always like, "Me too," and "I did this too," and "Oh, you said well, and me too," and "Here's what I did," and they one up the other person. But even if they don't one up the other person, sometimes just this "Me too" type of response, like, "Oh, I did that too, and let me tell you about me," and it kind of interrupts people when they're on a roll. So being able to have an effective conversation is really about listening, right?
It's so about listening. And I get that Me Too thing. I think that's a very common, not effective strategy, a very common strategy because we want to have that shared feeling of humanity, that shared connection, but often it does the opposite.
Yeah.
So,
Well, speaking of that, Diana, so what is the result or the downfall of having ineffective conversations? I mean, why does that matter?
ooh, I love this. And I looked this statistic up. So pardon me because my eyes are going to go to the statistic. And like last week, we talked about self awareness. Self
Mhm.
awareness is really closely tied to awareness of others. So people who lack this self awareness or this others awareness competency, um, two competencies, like two different sides of the same coin. So there's a statistic here that says people who lack this not only contribute to workplace stress, I repeat, contribute to workplace stress, they also cut a team's odds of success in half, according to a 2014 study. Now, yes, that is pre pandemic, and but that still applies to today, right?
Yeah. Well, in fact, thanks for mentioning that, Diana, because even though many of us are working remotely now, people do still show their self-awareness, and their awareness of others or lack thereof, right?
Right? Lack
Via
thereof, yeah.
via Zoom, or wherever you're talking, however you're connecting online. So yeah, so this is really relevant. So thank you, Diana. So for this week's topic, we're going to use a roadmap that is going to help us identify where you are in your journey. It's going to help us navigate to where you want to get to. So this is what it's going to look like. We're going to first talk about the mindset, which is really about why is this so important? Really understanding, not just doing it because it's the right thing to do, but really because it's going to help you in many ways. And then the skill set is going to be the behavior or what you're going to develop and what you need to develop to be able to be really good at mastering your conversations. And then the get, set, go is the where do we go from here? What can you do to help practice and learn and apply what you're hearing about today in 20 minutes? And so this roadmap of mindset, skill set, and get set go, you're going to hear me referring to that as we kind of go through this. So I'm looking at the time here. We're already 7 minutes after the hour. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about mindset. So why is awareness of others so important, Diana?
As executive coaches, as trainers, as people working in with experienced leaders day to day, what we really see and what we hear from people is how do I gain a more productive environment, or more easily, more I guess people centric language is like, how do I get people to do stuff? And usually they don't use the word stuff, they use another word. So it's you can see that it's on their mind. You can see that it's frustrating to a lot of the people we work with because now they feel like they have lost that sense, especially working in a remote environment. They've lost that sense of control, which they never really had in the first place, but it does feel like it when you're physically together, like you have some more control over your environment. So here, really today, this is really important because as you progress in your career, as you run your company, as you try to achieve goals, as you try to really do anything, we do it through people, we do it with people. And the currency of that is our relationships. Just like we know if a business is doing well by its bottom line, right? We also know we are thriving as people through our connections, our relationships.
Yeah.
Long-winded answer, Sandy. Sorry.
But this is really important stuff. So I'm glad that you were able to tell us a little more about that. And as I heard you talking, I started thinking about how if we don't do a good job of mastering our conversations, our two-way conversations, then we will probably inadvertently shut down others. And that's really awful when you're trying to be creative and innovative, or you're trying to have effective meetings, or as a leader. I mean, I've seen leaders who are saying, I've asked people questions, I've asked for their input, but they're not sharing anything. They just seem like they're not opening up. So there's something down, down underneath that we need to focus on. And that's where the skill sets come in. So now that we've talked about mindsets, let's now focus on the skill set for today, which is the awareness of others. Okay. And this is an actual competency or behavior. And this is defined as noticing and acknowledging others. Sometimes we tend to focus on ourselves, right? Too much.
Mhm.
So noticing and acknowledging others, ensuring that others feel valued, and adjusting one's own style to best fit with others. So it's really noticing, like looking at their body language, looking at their expressions, looking at maybe how you're coming across, and looking at that in between and going, are you connecting, or are you tuning them out or shutting them down? And then adjusting likewise. So to kind of elaborate on what this awareness of others' behaviors or skill looks like, now let's go ahead and touch on effective conversations, because we already touched on ineffective conversations.
Mhm.
So Diana, what would you think? How would you describe a crucial skill set that we need for effective conversations?
Do I just get one, or do I get a do I get several?
How
I'm
about
wordy, Sandy. I'm wordy. So
so funny? Well, let's talk about what you think is probably one of the most important, and then we'll go from there. How about that?
So I think one of the most important skill sets is empathy, and I think this is somebody in a podcast I did the other day. They called it like an it word right now, like, oh, empathy, empathy, and I think it's really misunderstood because I think the old ideas of empathy haven't caught up with the actual new ideas of empathy, and empathy is really hearing openly without judgment, hearing somebody's experience and being able to reflect it back to them in a way that they understand that you have heard them. And I'm just going to say, thank you, Brene Brown, like a little thank you, Brene Brown. Read a lot about this through her work. So, you know, an effective conversation includes the whole other person, not just the words,
Yeah,
right? And you had mentioned, are we in sync? Are we connecting? That's rapport. That's really creating a strong rapport. You can do that virtually, and you can absolutely do that in person. So however you connect, you can do that.
exactly. It's great that you mentioned Brene Brown, and I'm going to go ahead and share another great person who, and that was Stephen Covey when he wrote the book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a classic, but it's also timeless. And he described empathy as his fifth habit, which was to seek to understand before being understood. And that seeking to understand is really about truly understanding someone without judging, without thinking about what you're going to say next, without thinking you have to agree or disagree. It's just simply taking it all in, what they're saying, and showing and acknowledging that you understand, or if you don't quite understand, probe for more information until you do understand. And then
Oh,
acknowledge.
that's hard.
Yeah,
Don't you think? That's hard.
so hard. It was the hardest habit for people to learn when I taught that class. Yeah.
It's because when we're in like a stressful state. So this is my third one. Do I get a third skill?
Sure, go for it. You go for it.
Managing our stress, because when we are stressed out, we are not in the emotional state to truly be present, to truly think of others. We are thinking of ourselves. We are thinking of, how am I going to achieve this? And maybe we have pressure that's from internal or external, but that is another skill, being able to manage our stress effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so many layers here in terms of why we do what we do. But oftentimes, and I've talked to my husband about this, when he's having conversations with people, now mind you, this is social, but it still applies to work. He thinks about how he's coming across. He's wondering if he's going to say the right thing. And I keep reminding him, just ask questions, just really listen to the other people. They appreciate that, because then that's what helps people know that you truly want to understand them, that you're not just going through the motions. So when we say that one of the empathetic skills is to accurately view and acknowledge the situations from the perspective of others, it means not agreeing. It just simply means acknowledge the situation from their perspective. So for example, I like saying, you know what, now that you've mentioned it, Diana, I see what you're saying about how that could impact you. See, it's more about how it could impact you as opposed to impacting me, right?
I know it's crazy because it's like we're one and the same. We like to think that we're individuals and we're unique, and yes, we are.
Mhm.
However, we're still connected. Like we're still, it still is a two-way street, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I think about when I think about accurately anticipating responses and reactions from others, we mentioned that earlier. We
Mhm.
don't want surprises, right? We don't want to wonder, why did people blow up at something that we said? And we're like, how did that happen? So I remember I used to work in employee relations a long time ago.
Ooh,
And
I like a good story. Tell me,
oh,
tell me more.
well, it was just interesting because with employee relations, I was constantly in a position where we might have to have some difficult conversations. And that's when it's important to anticipate how others are going to be responding. Now, difficult conversations, they could be in the form of, talking about someone's performance. It could be a mistake that someone made. It could be how they came across. It may be that you want to help them. It may be that you have to discipline them. I mean, it's never fun having these difficult conversations. But what
Mm.
I found in these conversations was, if I took some time ahead of the conversation to anticipate what they were going to say or how they were going to respond, and oftentimes we don't take the time to think about that, but we think about, well, why would they be upset at this? What could go wrong about this? When we do that, then we can start thinking about how we can be prepared, or how we might preface something with good intentions, or how we
Yeah.
might say something differently, right?
And I mean, I know that we're coaches, and this is a gentle, shameless, shameless plug, but I think everybody should have coaches. I really do because we're right now we're in the skill set part of the roadmap.
Mhm.
And what you're talking about is really a lack of skill because once you build that skill up, you can do it in a safe environment with a coach, right?
Yeah.
Then it's when you're not with the coach and you're not working with the coach, you have that skill and
Yeah.
it takes less time because you're like, okay, this is my process now. Now I have a structure for this. Or maybe now I just have a tool, right? So
Well,
get a coach.
yeah,
That's what
exactly.
I'm gonna say, get a
You're
coach.
right, we're gonna talk a lot. I'm gonna talk more about what I've learned from being a coach because I learned from others, but for now, I'm looking at the time, we have a couple of
Yeah.
minutes left, and when you mentioned tools and resources, Diana, that made me realize that the next step of our roadmap, which is, we talked about mindset, which why this is so important. We talked about skill set, which is the behaviors, but now let's talk about the get, set, go, which is really about how we're going to move forward. What can you do to practice or apply what you've learned? So, Diana, can you think of some practice opportunities for those who are listening to start trying right away?
Yes. In our work environment, we have so many opportunities to listen to conversations, to observe conversations. So not necessarily listen, but observe holistically to, engage with how we're feeling inside. So today we can use it as an experiment day. As you listen to conversations, start to really like broaden your focus. But if you're directly, so that's one thing that you can do today, broaden your focus, watch how people are showing up, watch the behaviors, don't judge them, just watch them. But I think the second thing that we can do is this starts to evoke your internal empathy and show that to others, is really addressing the emotions in the conversation at the time and showing that you're making an effort to understand. So for example, if somebody's saying something to you, whether it's on the phone, whether it's on Zoom, whether you can sometimes read it tone and text depending if you know the person, but really just saying, um, hey, sounds like this is pretty frustrating. They might say, no, this isn't frustrating at all. You might want to even ask, like, so what are you feeling about this? So, because once people understand that you understand how they're feeling, then, logic talks to logic, emotion talks to emotion. So, I think that's the best way to do it. So, if you
Mhm.
repeat back, like, so it seems like you're pretty frustrated by this. Let's look at this together and figure out the next steps. That simple phrase or a variation of it in the appropriate way really changes the nature of a conversation.
And this is really important. So, Diana, you mentioned that, it sounds like as an example, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated. It wasn't that you said, I sense that you're frustrated at me. It's not about me, right? It's so not about me. It's
Take
about
yourself out of it. That's right. Yeah.
take yourself and be a mirror to the other people and say, "What?" So you're almost saying something like, "Wow, it sounds like you're really frustrated. It sounds like you're excited by this project." It's just something that kind of acknowledges, and then it oftentimes gets people to open up more, which is good. And that's where you really master your conversations.
It's so true. And I think the other part about mastering the conversation is, and this is a get, set, go as well, something you can do. Think about the medium in which the conversation would be most productive. A lot of people send texts or emails when that is not the appropriate way to have the conversation,
So true. So
right? So
true.
you have to think about that medium, because the medium is also a form of communication, whether this is, if you're saying something pretty serious in a text,
Yeah.
it's not the right thing. So
Yeah, or something negative. If you have a negative response, but you don't want to tell them over email or text, then it's a one-way conversation.
yeah,
And emails are the worst one-way one-way conversation. So here we are talking about the importance of two-way conversations, and that includes email, right?
yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to connect, right? Slack, Discord, Mighty Networks, what Facebook. I
Yeah,
mean, you name it, you name it, you name it.
yeah.
So yeah,
And so what I would recommend is if you're getting ready to say a negative comment, I would, or not, I don't mean a negative comment, but like maybe something that or you anticipate they're not going to take very well, and you're
mhm.
trying to be really constructive about it. Just say, "Hey, can I call you for just a moment? I want to run something by you." Or, "Hey, do you have a minute so we can talk more about this over phone?" Just picking up the phone is one of the best ways to reduce conflict instead of letting email just let someone stew about what they've heard. So
It's so true. And I know that we're over time, because we should call these probably 20-ish minutes, like a
yeah,
little
yeah,
bit more. But I think the other thing, just to add to this last point, is that when you have a difficult conversation as you grow in your career and you find that you're starting to shy away from it, get a coach. Like, get help,
yeah, yeah.
because it's so hard to ask, say, like, "Hey, how do I have this difficult conversation?" People will say, "Well, you're at this level. This is your job now," right? So if you are unsure, get somebody to help you. There are plenty of people who would be excited to help you. So that was my
Absolutely.
last get a coach.
That's a plug. No worries, no worries, gosh. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up. So our next LinkedIn Live is a week from today. It's Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on April 19th. And the topic, I just love this topic, is getting real at work, unlocking your authenticity.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I have been working on myself. And I can't wait to share with you by being authentic next week what I share with you. So Diane is going to interview me next week. So
Yeah.
I can share with you what I'm learning. But here's the thing. In the meantime, if you're interested in learning more, are there any other things that we want people to consider for the future? Not necessarily right away, but just something as a taste of something coming up later on, Diana. Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so if you're interested in this, if you have any questions, if there's a topic maybe you'd like us to talk about that we won't mention any names or anything, you can feel free to DM myself. My LinkedIn is Diana Elo, or you can DM Sandy Benz, and I believe it's Sandy Benz, right?
Yes,
You're
it
not
is.
Sandy A Benz or anything.
Right. It's just Sandy Benz.
Sandy Benz. Yeah, there you go. Or you can also follow us on our LinkedIn page, as we post a lot of tips there. We post a lot of really cool articles just to help you really engage that happiness, engage your inner leader, and we're here to help. So that's what I got for right now. Feel free to contact us.
Fantastic. Well, we're so glad that you could all join us today. Diana, it was great talking with you. We'll see you all again here at Blue Light Leadership LinkedIn Live sessions.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
See ya.